The Drive continues with Need to Know Basis on TSN 1200.
Welcome back to The Drive. Lieber Sage, AJ Jakubek, and Matt Conazvita. Here is what you need to know. It's draft day. 8 o'clock tonight, our coverage begins. JR, Dean Brown, Steve Lloyd will have the entire first-round coverage for you. The Ottawa Senators picking in the number 10 spot. Of course, the Buffalo Sabres pick first, with Seattle picking second. We will have everything for you. There's been a couple of trades already, including one that has just happened. The New York Rangers have dealt Pavel Buchnevich to the St. Louis Blues for Sammy Blais and a second-round pick. Both Sammy Blais and Pavel Buchnevich are restricted free agents. And Blais made 1.5 last year, and Buchnevich made 3.25, so a doubling of the salary. But that's a move that's just been made earlier today. Rasmus Ristolainen is now a member of the Philadelphia Flyers. Traded by the Buffalo Sabres to Philadelphia in exchange for the 13th overall pick tonight, a second-round pick in 2023, and defenseman Robert Hagg. So the Philadelphia Flyers get two defensemen this week in Ryan Ellis and now Rasmus Ristolainen. Are the Habs in on Jack Eichel? Darren Dreger says there are rumblings in Montreal about that. Can't wait for all of our coverage to begin at 8 o'clock tonight, and we'll have full coverage tomorrow, 2 through 7, rounds 2 through 7. And we'll get to Bob Stauffer here in just a second. You also needed to know that the Cleveland baseball team has officially changed their name to the Guardians. So from now on, it will be the Cleveland Guardians. And sticking in baseball, the Toronto Blue Jays are in New York tonight to take on the Mets. That is what you need to know. And let's get to the Gabriel Pizza hotline right now. The color analyst for the Edmonton Oilers. Oilers now on 630 CHED, our very good friend, Bob Stauffer. It would not be a draft day without talking to Mr. Stauffer. So we say, hello, Bob. How are you?
Good, Lee, AJ. Hey, what are you guys going to get Matt on? Like, is Matt going to work his way into the mix here as well? How does that all... I mean, he's been sitting there. He's actually the whole key to that show, isn't he? I'm trying to recall what exactly works there in Ottawa. By the way, guys, just think next year we'll be in Montreal. We can actually do this face-to-face. That'll be a good thing.
Well, just picture this, Bob, and I'll let AJ ask the first question. Just picture this. He's been in Winnipeg for 10 days covering soccer.
12.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay.
So he flew back yesterday, missed the show completely. It was just Matt and I handling things for the second Thursday in a row. And now, because they decided to rip out our studio on NHL Draft Day, we're in a production room, but we're in the same room with a big pane of glass between us. But for the first time in, I don't think we've done a show in the same room together.
Since 2019.
Since 2019, sure. I can look through the pane of glass and see Aaron John and his every move during this show.
Yeah, it was weird this year doing play-by-play. We were in a similar situation for the road games. We had a pane of glass separating Jack and myself, and then later Cam Moon when he joined us as part of our play-by-play group during the course of the year. Definitely looking forward to getting some normalcy back. I know that Canada has rocketed past the United States, up around 54% full vaccination of the population. That's 54%. That includes 12 and under. 12 plus, we're close to 61, 62%. Got to keep that going. We're well on our way to finally getting some normalcy in society.
Well, Bob, we love talking to you all the time, but especially on draft day, you're always quite plugged in. What are you expecting tonight? Just around the league, are you expecting any more big deals, or what's the scuttlebutt that you're hearing?
I think we're going to see lots of movement. It's funny. There's been and guys, look, when you're the Edmonton Oilers broadcaster, and the team had a multitude of 4 number 1 picks, and ironically they did win the lottery twice, but they won it in 14 when they got Draisaitl third. And I'll never forget your current general manager, Pierre Dorion, coming by So the way it works at the draft, for your listeners that are unaware of this, is the whole focus for an organization is they don't want to be in that front row because that means you finish basically, 24th through 30th or 25th through 31st in the building. And as a broadcaster, you're at a total advantage when your team's drafted in that spot because it's a sexier sell and you're going to get a top end guy. And I'll never forget Pierre Dorion coming by me after the Oilers got Leon Draisaitl 3rd overall, and he said, "Stoff, you guys just got the best player in the draft." And that has ultimately come to fruition. So we had a lot of years where Edmonton had top end picks. Obviously, they got McDavid the next year, and the last 3 seasons they've got the 2 highest scoring players in the NHL by a wide margin. I know that the LA pick at number 8 is available. I wonder at Anaheim whether or not Anaheim can make it happen. They're looking to upgrade their team. I think that they might look at Dylan Guenther at number 3 from the Edmonton Oil Kings if they hold on to the pick at number 3. Do the goaltenders? There's 2 goalies this year, both represented by Jerry Johansson and the Sports Corporation. Wallstad and Sebastian Cossa. Those guys both gone in the top 13. Does Detroit take a goalie at 6? Would they do something? They surprised us all when they took Seitzer a couple of years ago. So I think there's going to be some movement. I think the value in this year's first round after about the first 12 or 13 and the goalies are out of the equation, I think you could see some picks moving there. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. And I say that a lot of times we think the trade deadline or the draft is going to be, incredible amount of movement and then nothing happens. And we're selling it like, they sell that show, The Bachelor, the most spectacular rose ceremony, the most spectacular draft. I actually think there's going to be a fair amount of movement this year. I do think it's going to be really entertaining times.
I'm interested if you're comparing apples to apples and you watch The Bachelor knowing that that's a really good comparison. Is that true, Bob?
I'm a married man. I have now a soon-to-be 18-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
And I will tell you there's certain shows that I've tried to talk my wife out of watching, and The Bachelor may be one of them, okay? I think if we're all supposed to be open-minded and accepting of one another in these days.
Yeah.
But I think if you're a dude and you're regularly watching the Bachelor, my guess is somewhere along the lines you've lost your soul. So let's just leave it at that.
Bob, my parents, Zane and Lynn, 51 years married. You know what the secret to success is? When my mom's watching The Bachelor or The Bachelorette upstairs, downstairs my dad is watching sports.
Yeah. I would say the secret of success in marriage, I celebrated my 20th anniversary, AJ, a couple days ago. And I've always operated, my dad gave me some advice long before he passed away. He said, "Bob, here's the key. Let your wife make all the small decisions and understand there's no big decisions."
That's some great advice. All right, let's get back on the draft tonight because there are 2 guys out of Edmonton that, with Ottawa sitting at number 10, I don't know. You tell us, Dylan Guenther and the goaltender Sebastian Cossa, about their years in Edmonton in the WHL and where you think they might go. There's a lot of people here in Ottawa that think they might have a choice of goaltenders at number 10 if they want to, with both of those guys in Wallstead and Cossa.
How many goalies do they need in that organization?
14, Bob, is the answer. 14.
Yeah. Didn't they sign Mads Sogard, who was a second-round pick out of Medicine Hat? I do not expect Dylan Guenther. I think he's going in the top 5. So just so your listeners are aware, this year Edmonton played at the Downtown Community Arena in Edmonton, which is adjacent. It's the practice facility next to Rogers Place. We did not travel as Oilers broadcasters this year. So I saw the Oil Kings play 8 times. Guenther played 6 of those games, and Cossa started 7. Edmonton only played against the teams in the Central Division, so they played against the Alberta teams. Red Deer was no good. Calgary was okay. Lethbridge was poorly coached and really undisciplined. Medicine had small skill. The Oil Kings went 22-1. The WHL has not been there's too many teams in the WHL. They haven't been great at the Memorial Cup. Last team to win was Edmonton in 2014. Edmonton has got a hell of a team right now. They got a lot of talent. Jake Neighbors, first rounder from St. Louis, world junior caliber type player. Guenther, the comparable I would give you with him is he's a right-handed shooting version of Kyle Connor, but more advanced. Kyle Connor's, been a 3-time 30-goal scorer. that I don't think people thought was going to be as good as he ultimately has turned out to be from that 2015 draft. Gunther has a way higher ceiling. He didn't kill it at the U18. Dave Barr, who grew up in Edmonton, was the head coach of that team. Gunther did some of the crap, frankly. He did the penalty killing and didn't get off to a hot start offensively. Had kind of a cold stick, but he's an elite level finisher. He's the type of game that a type of player that can change his release point. I think, I know Anaheim's, some people believe they're moving the pick. If they're moving the pick, you got to think it's for Eichel. But I could see Anaheim, if they hold the pick, looking at a guy like Dylan Gunther because they need to score. Seagrass is more of a playmaker, and obviously they got Drysdale as a real exciting guy in the back end. Sebastian Cossa is the best goaltender of the WHL guys since Carey Price. He's 6'6". He was the toughest player on their team, and he was the goalie. Oil Kings didn't have a lot of toughness. They had some teams take some liberties with him during the year. He's got a bit of an edge. He's got a little bit of a you-know-what, screw-you mentality. He is an elite athlete at that size. This is not a blocker at 6'6". This is a guy that can make saves. And, my hope at one time was Edmonton would get him at 19. No chance. I've talked to Jerry Johansson, who's got both Wallstedt and Cossa, and the belief is they're both going in the top 13 of the draft, especially now that Buffalo's picked up a second first-rounder here. I cannot see, I'm looking at Detroit at 6 and San Jose at 7 and, Chicago at 11 or 12, depending upon how you slot things. Chicago, you've got the Calgary Flames, and now you've got Philadelphia. I kind of didn't think Ottawa was going to take a goalie. I wouldn't hesitate taking Cossa. I think he's going to be Canada's World Junior goalie this year, 1 year in the AHL after that, and then he'll be in the NHL, within 3 years. He's that good of a goaltending prospect. He's pretty elite.
I wonder, I know you see as many games as you can in the WHL, and you saw a bunch this year, as you mentioned, but I wonder, how do you compare him to a guy like Mads Søgaard from Medicine Hat? Because I was so impressed with what I saw this year at a Søgaard, winning all 7 of his AHL games, and also a big guy that can move at that size. That was the thing that really impressed me about Søgaard, is the fact that here's a guy that he's not a blocker, much like Cossa. So is there a comparison there to Søgaard, or what are you seeing?
I think that Kossa's a little bit more athletic. Søgaard was the only Medicine Hat played Edmonton in the playoffs a couple of years ago. Geez, that seems like a long time ago now, guys. But and the only reason why Medicine Hat had a puncher's chance in that series was because of Søgaard. Again, AJ, you know the WHL pretty well, and Medicine Hat's been an organization that hasn't been preoccupied on size. They made a lot of bet on some smaller players. And, I mean, ultimately, Edmonton that year lost to Prince Albert, who had a big, heavy, tough team. So, I think Søgaard's pretty good. He's better than any goaltending prospect the Oilers have. Edmonton's got Stuart Skinner as a third rounder. They got a Russian named Konovalov. And the one thing I would say just with Ottawa, they can draft. It's got to be stated. I know fans there get frustrated. I'm not going to be an apologist for Pierre Dorion. I like Pierre. There's some challenges that team's had in retaining some of their top players. To me, that's not on the GM. The Sens have hit on a lot of guys. Mark Stone was a 6th-rounder. Off the top of my head, I'm just driving right now. I think Hoffman was a 5th-rounder. They made some pretty good draft picks, and I think Søgaard's a good pick. I'm going to be really intrigued to see what Ottawa does at 10. But again, I think that I reiterate what I say about Sebastian Cossa. He is the best goaltending prospect out of the WHL since Carey Price went 5th overall back in 2005.
And wondering just on Cole Sillinger, how much you know on him and how much you've maybe seen him. He played this last year in the USHL just because there was no WHL until they got things going in the bubble late in the season, but he did play as a 16-year-old and put up really good numbers in Medicine Hat with 53 points in 48 games that year, and he would have played as a 15-year-old in the playoffs for Medicine Hat that year against Edmonton.
Yeah, you know what? I've only just taken a look at. I think I've seen him once, AJ, in person. Skilled guy, right? Smart player. His dad, of course, went 11th in the greatest draft in the history of the NHL in 1989, Detroit Red Wings. I often remind Mike used to be the Oilers director of player personnel at one time. He no longer is. but I used to joke with them all the time, Tell you, Detroit blew it. They passed on Nicholas Lidstrom twice and got him in the third round that year, and so they had an unbelievable draft. It's interesting. Stan Coben, who was on the U18 team out of Kamloops, has sort of shot up. I don't see as much reluctance in smaller players today at forward. I do think teams are still looking for bigger D. And I'm a little, with the WHL, and so the listeners are aware, it's not as good a league as the OHL. And it's simple. There's too many teams based on the combined population of the 4 Western Canadian provinces, and they don't get the caliber of American players that the OHL does. So the OHL has been a better, more competitive league. It's just that simple. But I do think that they're now, because the WHL's had such a long run where they haven't won a Memorial Cup. WHL players used to be overrated 20, 25 years ago. Now they're, and Quebec League players maybe were a little underrated because their league was the league that struggled in the Memorial Cup. And I almost think now there might be some sleepers out of the Western League. Sillinger really is ultimately a WHL player. You guys all know how good Shane Wright's going to be in a year from now. Connor Bedard's pretty special as well. But there's some good players, albeit a little bit undersized, out of the Western League for this upcoming draft this year. I think Sillinger, to me, Sillinger's a mid to late first-round pick.
What are the Edmonton Oilers doing here with Duncan Keith and Zach Hyman and some of the other guys that have been rumored, or certainly they signed or traded for Duncan Keith? Will Zach Hyman become an Edmonton Oiler in your opinion?
I'd say there's a decent chance. Obviously the organization was disappointed that Adam Larson, elected to sign with Seattle. I'm sure AJ's probably brought this up, but for the listeners that are unaware, Adam Larson's parents flew 30 hours to Edmonton to come into Seattle and play, and then his dad, subsequent to his arrival in the city, unfortunately suffered a massive heart attack and died. And I wonder whether or not for anybody out there that's gone through a personal tragedy that's affected their family, sometimes it's difficult in certain situations and you're just looking for a fresh start. And I think ultimately I have had a chance to communicate with Adam since he made his decision. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but I think he was looking for a fresh start. So that was a big loss because he was, the Oilers' best defensive defenseman. They're going to have to find a way to replace him. Duncan Keith, conversely, the family situation worked to Edmonton's advantage. The Oilers' key players, McDavid and Draisaitl, certainly would have communicated the team needed more experience. Keith brings them that on the left side. I know that, if you're Kirby Dach and you're in Chicago and Duncan Keith was one of the guys you looked up to, you might be sitting there, that might have hurt losing him. So we'll see what ends up transpiring and how Edmonton fills that hole with Larson's absence. And then in terms of Hyman, it's still in Toronto's hands, guys. Ultimately, Toronto's going to decide the fate here. Either they step up and they keep him, or he goes to free agency. And if he goes to free agency, I'd say the Oilers have a pretty good chance they got a puncher's chance to get Zach Hyman signed. I think he'd be a terrific fit in Edmonton.
What else do you think the Oilers do? This is a big offseason for them with a lot more cap space than they've been able to work with over the last few years.
Well, if they no matter what, they're on the top 6 left wing. They got Nugent Hopkins. It's funny, AJ, I would have thought 6 weeks ago they would have re-signed Larson and not gotten Nugent Hopkins done. And instead, they got Nugent Hopkins done pretty quickly. So they're adding another top 6 left wing. Whether it's Hyman or somebody else, they're adding somebody. They're going to try to improve their bottom 6 forwards out so that they don't have to be so reliant 5-on-5 with the McDavid and Draisaitl lines. Obviously, Larson they're going to have to replace. Now, if they bring back Tyson Barrie, it could be a chain reaction. That might mean that a guy like Ethan Bear ends up in play because they're going to need a heavier, bigger body that can defend. I hear there's a fair amount of interest on a guy like Yanni Hakanpää around the league, sort of as a third pairing, rangy 6'5" right shot defender. So we have to wait and see on that front. Slater Cuckoo, I think he'd like to kind of return. I think he's from the Ottawa area. Whether or not he's an unrestricted free agent with Edmonton, I wonder whether or not Ottawa. I haven't taken a look at the Sens depth chart these days. He's a third pairing guy on the left side. I think there might be some interest for Edmonton to re-sign him. But the Oilers they're going to add experience. You win in the playoffs with depth experience in goaltending. The goaltending market's thin. Edmonton might have to come. Smith's basically re-signed. It hasn't been formally announced by the team. But, it could be Smith and Koskinen for another year unless Edmonton can get a different goalie. I think they'll add some experience and some depth up front, experience and depth on defense.
Before we let you go, Bob, always interested in your opinion. You mentioned Jack Eichel. Do you think he gets moved tonight or tomorrow, and where to? Where do you think is the best fit for him?
Oh, I keep circling back to the Rangers, and I wonder about Ryan Strome moving out. Pete Chiarelli made a bad trade there. That's all there is to it. And I remember tweeting after that trade was made, the hope is that Ryan Spooner will add some more speed. That said, Ryan Strome was not putting up the offensive numbers that he put up with the Rangers. Of course, he's played a lot with Panarin, and Panarin can drive things. So I still think the Rangers with Eichel. I'll tell you, people say, well, what about Chicago? Because all the cap space they have. And I'm like, I'm not trading Kirby Dach to get Jack Eichel. Kirby Dach's a 6'4" right shot center. He's not going to be as high end as Jack Eichel, but he's also not going to be $10.5 million. To me, the Rangers, that's the type of play. If I was LA, I wouldn't move Byfield for him. I think if I was Anaheim, I'd consider moving the third, but I'm not moving Drysdale or Zegras. So I'm going to be really intrigued to see how it plays out. But to me, it's the Rangers. That's the team that makes the most sense.
Yeah. Interesting earlier today, Darren Dreger saying that Montreal could be in the mix. I wonder how serious they would be. That would certainly be interesting if Jack Eichel is a member of the Montreal Canadiens. Bob, always love NHL draft night, and our coverage isn't complete, usually without you on it. So we appreciate your time today.
Yeah, well, when you're stuck and can't get anybody better, feel free to give me a call, okay?
Listen, this is one of our days. We circle the calendar. There's only the best of the best is on. That's why you're on today.
That's not going to... Just to set the record, that's not the standard that we're trying to set with our show. So you guys have a great show, and let's have some fun tonight. See you guys.
Thanks, Bob.
There goes Bob Stauffer, color voice of the Edmonton Oilers, 6:30 CHED on the Gabriel Pizza hotline. Gabriel Pizza, the bigger, better pizza. You can order online at GabrielPizza.com. Matt Conisvita with a look at your traffic, and we'll come back and kind of dig into some of Bob's thoughts and our own as we get closer and closer to the NHL entry draft. Our coverage begins at 8 o'clock with JR, Steve Lloyd, and Dean Brown here on TSN 1200.
Let's get back to the drive on the home of the Sens, TSN 1200.
Welcome back to the Drive. Lever Stage, AJ Jakubek, Matt Conisvita. Are you starting to get itchy here? You've been up pacing. I am. Starting to get there.
Yeah, I screwed up at 3 o'clock.
Well, it's 4:34.
I thought the draft was at 7, and our coverage was at 7. Our coverage is at 8.
Well, tune in at 7 anyway. You probably hear an hour of Dan Patrick. I'm sure it'll be entertaining, and then you won't miss a word.
I like Dan Patrick, but it's kind of thrown off my day a little bit because I'm like, 8 o'clock? Now I got 2 hours between the show and...
Well, if we're being totally honest here about throwing off your day, you just said to me about 5 minutes ago, usually when it's 4:30, there's only a half hour left in the show.
Well, for the last 12 days.
Right, because you've been in Winnipeg. It's been an hour back. Now you got a full hour and a half still to go.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's draft day. I love draft day.
And this one with so much intrigue because legitimately, if I asked you to write down 2 through 10, how many do you think you're getting right?
Per team? Oh, maybe none.
No, but yeah, we know Power's going number 1. But after that, there's legitimate questions about who's going next. That's fantastic. I have no idea who's going next. I think Beniers will go next. But that's just my own personal opinion of what Seattle might do. I have no idea. And I think that intrigue in itself for tonight should bring a lot of people in.
Yeah, I mean, we know Owen Power's going one, and I think, I talked about it earlier, and Bob Stauffer used the Bachelor analogy. We're trying to suck you in, but he seems to think that there could be some movement finally within the top 10. And I guess if someone like Eichel is going, there's a player that would certainly command some sort of return that would include a top 10 pick. So that's where it gets really interesting, where you could tune in tonight and potentially see part of a Jack Eichel trade.
Yeah, but the Rangers don't pick in the top 10.
No, for sure, but just having those conversations, right, with other teams. Now, maybe the Rangers give up their pick along with a pretty big package in order to get him. And technically it's the 16th pick, but realistically it's the 15th pick.
Did you hear the director of scouting
Yes,
from
I did.
Chicago about forfeiture?
Yeah.
Top 11 pick right there. Will go in the top 11 tonight.
Yeah. So
I know we can be confused by that when it comes to saying if it's like after you get to 11, is it really the 12th pick or the 13th overall? Whatever.
Anyways, the Rangers really have the 15th pick.
Yep.
And, for them to make this happen, certainly that would be in play, but they're going to have to give up a lot more than, say, a team would if they give up the third pick than the Rangers at 15, because there's a big gap there from 15 to 3, and the Rangers, well, they've got some pieces to potentially make it happen. You want to talk about a team in it to win now? The New York Rangers. And that's what we're seeing, right? Philadelphia Flyers. Like, they've added Ristolainen and Ellis. They're in it to win now. They missed the playoffs. The Rangers are talking about a Jack Eichel trade. In it to win now. And you're already talking about Tampa Bay and Carolina and Toronto and Boston and the New York Islanders and Washington and Pittsburgh. None of these teams are thinking future, right?
Did you mention Tampa and Florida?
I did not mention Florida. I did say Tampa. I did not mention Florida. They're in to win now, right? So if you're the Montreal Canadiens, and that's where, it gets intriguing from their standpoint, right? About in these Jack Eichel talks. Because if you're the Montreal Canadiens and you look at that roster right now and you take away Shea Weber, and you potentially take away for at least the start of the season, depending on his injuries, Carey Price, I'm not feeling it in terms of that team being in the playoffs next year.
Well, but they will replace that money, right?
Okay, but it's one thing. It's the same deal with the Oilers. Okay, yeah, they lose Larson, they'll replace that money, but are you going to get someone better? And now the Oilers are in a different boat because they're in a weaker conference. But this conference is good. And that's why I've said it all along in terms of the Ottawa Senators and their playoff hopes next year. And I'll say it again, and I'll continue to say it, regardless of what they do this offseason. Even if they get their top 6 forward and up the middle and their top 4 defensemen and they get exactly what they want and it looks great. Do I think this team is going to push for a playoff spot? Absolutely. Do I think this team is a good bet to make the playoffs? I feel like it's a year too soon because they're going to need a couple of these teams to drop off and drop off dramatically, a Pittsburgh or a Washington or a Boston or someone of that ilk, if they're going to make the playoffs. Simple as that. Like, I think the East is as good as it's been in a long, long time, and it seems to be getting better. There's an arms race right now, and it's taking place in the East, and a team that gets Jack Eichel, especially if it's the New York Rangers, they're only going to be that much better going into the season. So it's not going to be easy. There's going to be some good teams that miss in the East, and Ottawa, to me, again, keep the eyes on the prize. It's not about making the playoffs in 2022. It's about potentially winning a Stanley Cup by, say, 2026. And if you happen to miss the playoffs, but you take another step and you're competitive and push for a playoff spot next year, that's not going to be an unsuccessful season in what is a deeper and better Eastern Conference.
Yeah, and that's your opinion. I'm right there with you, AJ. But the owner of the Ottawa Senators might not have that same opinion. Right? The owner of the Ottawa Senators last week, there's no more excuses. It's showtime. We've done the rebuild. There's no more, we're still in the rebuild. We're here to play, and damn it, we're going to win.
And I get that.
That's what the owner of the Ottawa Senators has said.
And I get that, but
okay.
I still think, look, if you make the playoffs next year, it's a bonus. It's not a disappointment. It'll be a disappointment if they're in the same place that they are this year, absolutely. But if they finish with 90 points next year and push for a playoff spot and miss, and your core keeps building, that is not a disappointing season. And if it's viewed that way internally, I'm sorry. I think they're out to lunch.
Let's circle back to Jack Eichel here. Okay? The move that the New York Rangers made about an hour ago, trading Pavel Buchnevich to St. Louis, they got Sammy Blais in a second back. Darren Dreger tweeting it gives them more flexibility financially moving forward. Easily the first thing I thought. The guy said 3.25. He's an RFA. He scored 20 goals in 54 games last year. Buchnevich did. You're going to have to pay him more than 3.25. Well, we're not going to pay you that because we might be circling the wagons for a Jack Eichel or somebody else, and they needed to do something to clear some space. No?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear they're the favorites to land Jack Eichel. To me, I've been saying it. We heard Bob Stauffer saying it. It just seems like it's the right fit. It seems like it's the right fit for him. You've got the BU connection with Chris Drury there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's not going to have all the same kind of pressure. There's pressure, right? In New York, the fans can be ruthless. It's not the same sort of day-to-day pressure that maybe you deal with in a Buffalo or a Canadian city. But on game day in New York, if you're making $10 million plus and you're not producing, you're going to get booed.
Yes.
You're going to get booed there probably more than any other city in the National Hockey League. Now, you won't have to deal with, if you turn on the radio, the same types of, you know, they're probably more focused on the Giants and the Yankees and all that. But it can be
Jets.
It can be a ruthless place when you're not doing well. That being said, I think like he doesn't have to go in and be the savior there. They've got a guy like Panarin, right? That, you know, they're paying a lot of money to be kind of the star player, and they can always be kind of 1A and 1B in terms of, you know, the face of the franchise. You got the reigning. I don't think he should have won. I think he should have been in the mix. I don't think he should have won. But you've got the reigning Norris Trophy winner and Adam Fox, so he can just be part of a core. And look, if they get Jack Eichel and Eichel can get healthy, that's going to be a team that can push for a Stanley Cup sooner rather than later as well. Well, we heard Pierre McGuire, right? On our radio station, the two places that intrigued him, New York Rangers and the Ottawa Senators. There's a reason why. A lot of young talent and two groups that look positioned to win a championship in the next few years. But the Rangers are ahead of the curve and ahead of where the Ottawa Senators are. And back to the Sens, I just think it's important. You cannot cut corners to try and just snap your fingers and say, all right, we're winning now. You can't. You got to keep taking steps. Doesn't mean you can't make trades to make your team better now, but I don't want to see this team take one step forward this year in order to take two steps back because you have to make the playoffs.
Okay, we got a breaking deal.
Yeah.
Here in
Ekman-Larsson.
Yep. So Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Connor Garland go to the Vancouver Canucks. Going back, Eriksson, Roussel, Beagle, and the 9th overall pick in tonight's draft, one selection ahead of the Ottawa Senators. Okay.
We've talked about that Louis Eriksson contract. It's one of the worst contracts in the National Hockey League. So there's no such thing as an untradeable contract, but yeah, I mean, that's the price.
Andrew Ladd's putting up his hand going, I'm an Arizona Coyote, and
yeah.
Louis Eriksson's going, oh, I can be an Arizona Coyote too.
Well, Ekman Larsson did not have a very good season this year by his standards, but if you're the Canucks, you give up the number 9 pick. I think almost more important than getting a guy, and Garland's a decent player too, but getting a guy like Ekman Larsson is just the cap space that they got, right? Cap space means so much.
Mhm.
And to get rid of 3 contracts like that, and in particular one that's one of the worst in the National Hockey League, that's the price that it's going to take. So
Oliver
interesting move that probably benefits both sides.
Oliver Ekman Larsson, Connor Garland, our Vancouver Canucks, and the Arizona Coyotes get Eriksson, Roussel, Beagle, and the 9th overall pick in the deal. Back with more of The Drive on TSN 1200.
Let's get back to the drive on the home of the Sens, TSN 1200.
Welcome back to The Drive. Lever Sage, AJ Jakubek, and Matt Conasvita. It is draft day here on TSN 1200. And AJ, your thoughts on the big trade? Arizona back into the number 9 spot and taking on a bunch of lofty contracts to get rid of Oliver Ekman Larsson and Connor Garland going to the Vancouver Canucks.
Good tune.
AJ, I asked you a question. It's draft day. We're running out of time.
Yeah,
we need to hustle
Well, we
a little
talked
bit
about
here.
this last segment, but I'm happy to reiterate. So
Yeah, but we were getting to it as the music was going. We didn't get a chance to flush it out.
That's
Andre Tourney's not going to have a very good team.
listen, you know what? It's made my day just being able, draft day, you and I should be working together. And the fact that we get to do it with Matt Conasvita makes it even better.
We haven't seen him today, so that's good.
But it's good to be able to see your face and
Yeah.
just
You're up, you're down, you're pacing.
especially- Yeah, no, I have been pacing a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm into it. It's draft day.
Right. When does the music stop, AJ?
All right. You asked me about Ekman Larsson, I'll tell you.
Yeah. He's got a lot of term left.
Well, and that's the thing that's a little bit concerning if you're a Canucks fan, right? You're giving up the 9th pick this year to really get some bad contracts, in particular one bad contract, out of the way in Louis Eriksson. So you free up some money this year. You do get a guy that I think should be a pretty good defenseman, but probably just okay the last couple of years in terms of what he's brought to the table, and the underlying numbers tell you that as well. So I don't know. It's a fascinating deal. It might be one of those deals that Canucks fans like today but don't love tomorrow. And if you end up with a bad contract going forward out of this, and you have to give up the 9th overall pick to do it, that could be problematic for a fan base that is already not the biggest fans of their general manager in Jim Benning.
Well, Oliver Ekman Larsson was a guy that wanted to go to Boston or Vancouver, right? Those were the 2 teams he wanted to go to. Well, he got his wish. 30 years old, makes $8.25 million, and he makes it until the end of 2027. So 30 years old, I guess, what's he got left? It's almost like a guy when he plays in Arizona, like Ristolainen, who got traded earlier. I have no idea how good or bad Rasmus Ristolainen is at 26 years old. No idea. Because his underlying numbers are some of the worst underlying numbers in the NHL. But he played on Buffalo, and he played big minutes on a crappy team for a long time. I have no idea how good Oliver Ekman Larsson is. No idea. Because he's played on a crappy team for so long.
Yeah, and that's a Vancouver team that they were really disappointed with what happened this past year. They've got some really good pieces, right? And obviously a guy like Ekman Larsson, I'm sure the Sedins would have, you wonder how much influence they had on this move.
Yep.
The fact that they are now part of the organization as part of the management team alongside Jim Benning. So obviously they would think you're not giving up the 9th overall pick and taking on this type of money if you're not sure that that's a player that can come in and do the job for you for 6 years, right? Or at least the first 3 or 4. So I'd have to think that they played a part in this move. Look, with Quinn Hughes and with Pettersson and Horvat, and you got JT Miller and you got Besser. I mean, they should have been a lot better this past year. And I get that COVID affected them towards the end of the season, but they were bad before the COVID issues hit. So in a division where you've got an expansion Seattle team that isn't likely going to be the same type of team that we saw from Vegas out of the gate, where you've got the 3 California teams, where you've got a Calgary team with still a lot of question marks surrounding them. Anything less than a playoff berth in Vancouver will be a major disappointment.
Well, now, they should be a much better team in a weaker conference this year. And I can't imagine that. I just had to look up, Pettersson played 26 games last year, but he was a non-factor. And when one of your best players,
Yep.
if not your best player, is hurt, injured, and when he did play, he wasn't very good, you expect him to be a lot better, which would make the Canucks a lot better.
Well, sometimes you overthink things, right? When you look at teams and you wonder, okay, well, this guy needs to be better, and you need more from your fourth line left winger, and you need more from your third line center and your number 4 defenseman. Well, sometimes it's as simple as you need more from your best players, right? When your best players don't play well, you're in big, big trouble. And Elias Pettersson was tracking to be a superstar, not just a star, a superstar in the National Hockey League. And, injuries played a part, but he had a slow start.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had, 1 point in his first 8 or 9 games. He just never really got going. So it starts with him, right? I mean, if he's better, all of a sudden they're a lot better. And I can't imagine he's going to have the same type of season that we saw this past year because, again, before that he was tracking. You watch him in the playoffs the year before when they did really well in the bubble and won 2 series and took Vegas to 7 games. Tracking to be a superstar, but took a bit of a step back last year. If he's better, this should be a much better team.
And just to finish off on the Canucks here, I think when Pettersson's a guy that you really didn't know, like I thought the Canucks were in trouble when it came to signing Pettersson and Quinn Hughes because of how good they were the previous year, right? And then they both weren't very good. Maybe they saved enough money with them not being very good in their contracts here to be able to bring in some other guys. Maybe they saved themselves a little bit of money with how bad those two were. For whatever reason. They just weren't. The 2 best players on that team are Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson.
Well, and they've added a top 6 forward here too. That's the other thing. He had 39 points in 49 games, Connor Garland, last year. A real breakout campaign for him. So
we'll have to sign him.
That was an area when you talk to people in Vancouver all season long, it was like, okay, what did you have on your second line? And Höglander had a pretty decent rookie season, so you're hoping for a little bit more out of him. But, bringing in a guy like Connor Garland, there's no doubt this season they're a better hockey team.
Right.
And
they're a good team.
They should be. Like right now, when I look at playoff teams in that division, I look at Vegas, Edmonton, and Vancouver. And Calgary's got to find a way to take a 4th spot, whether it's, top 3 in the division or a wild card spot with, the Central being a little bit stronger. And they can get there, but they need to figure things out. And, we've seen some this has been fascinating. It's been fun, right? We've seen some pretty big moves around the league over the last few days, and maybe Jack Eichel gets traded, but, Calgary, I have to think that Calgary, when they look at what the Vancouver Canucks have done, is probably saying, okay, we weren't very good the last 2 years, and in particular this past year. What are we going to do to get better? And do you move 1 or 2? even 3. I think it's unlikely you move 3, but 1 or 2 of Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan, Matthew Tkachuk.
Christina Pampilli coming up in the 580 CFRA News Desk. AJ will have what you need to know, and we'll continue this draft day coverage. Some big trades already have been made as we look to tonight. Our coverage begins at 8. JR, Steve Lloyd, Dean Brown. The entire first round of the NHL draft, 8 o'clock tonight here on TSN 1200.